Hey, welcome back to Mr. PL's with Precal. This is Unit 3, Topic 3, Lesson number 7, Day 2, which is on solving trigonometric equations. And we're going to get more into solving the equations in this video. Now, we're going to start off with very basic questions on just solving quadratics or polynomial functions. Set them equal to 0, so then you have x squared minus x equals 0. I moved the x to the other side. Basically, I subtracted x. And then I can factor out the x, and that becomes x minus 1. And then I can set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So x equals both 0 and 1. Now you can have multiple answers, like some of these equations are going to have multiple answers as well. So this becomes 2x squared minus x equals 0. Factor out the x, becomes 2x minus 1. X equals 0 is this one, and then 2x minus 1 equals 0 becomes 2x equals 1, which means x is 1/2. Okay, and then this one, minus 2x equals 0. They all have an x involved. X squared minus x minus 2. And then this can be factored again. Well, this is going to be x equals 0 right here. And then this can be factored into x minus 2 times x plus 1. And that becomes x equals 2, and that becomes x equals negative 1. So 3 different answers in that case, which I had a degree of 3, which kind of makes sense. So pi over 6 is 30-degree angle. Pi over 4 is, you should know, is 45-degree angle, and this is a 60-degree angle. So in which quadrants? So if you remember this, which quadrants are, let's see, reference angle, quadrant 2, a 30-degree reference angle will be right here. 180 minus 30 makes, okay, so, sorry, so if it was 6 all the way around, so then you know it's 5 pi over 6 is second quadrant. 6 is halfway, and then third quadrant would be 7/6 pi, and then quadrant 4 would be almost all the way around, so not quite, so that's 11 pi over 6. 12/6 would have been all the way around. And 45-degree angle, so we've got quadrant 2 pi, I'm sorry, quadrant 1 is pi over 4, 2 pi over 4, 3 pi over 4, 4/4 is 5 pi over 4, 6/4, 7/4, so 7 pi over 4. And then 60 degrees, we have pi over 3 here. So pi over 3, 2 pi over 3, 3 pi over 3, then 4 pi over 3, and then 5 pi over 3, and then 6 pi over 3, which would be a full circle. Okay, so solving these equations. So the first one's a lot like we did on the last video. Cosine of x is equal to negative 1. Now, when does the function have, it's only going to the left. That's when x is 180 degrees, which would be pi. Pi would be the only answer. So if you think about it, so remember this is 1, 0, this is 0, 1, this is negative 1, 0, this is 0, negative 1. So the only time cosine is going to be negative 1, because here it's 0, here it's 0, here it's 1, is when you're here at 180 degrees. So when you look at question number 2, we want to get the trig function all by itself. Right now it's being multiplied by square root of 3. I'll do the inverse, which is divide both sides by square root of 3. So that gives me cosecant of x equals 2 over the square root of 3. But then I want to change cosecant into its reciprocal. So cosecant is the reciprocal of sine of x. But if I do that, if I flip this, I have to also flip this. And then you ask yourself, sine of what equals square root of 3 over 2? And that happens to be 60 degrees. So if you remember, all students take calculus, sine is positive in quadrants 1 and 2. So either a 60-degree angle, so that would be x can be pi over 3, which would be a 60-degree angle, or it can be over here, which would be 2 pi over 3. Or 2 pi over 3, which would be a 60-degree angle in the second quadrant. Those are both to be positive. Now, if it had been negative, then it would have been these two quadrants down here. All right, so this one, first thing I'm going to do is change cotangent into tangent. So, yeah, tangent. So this becomes tangent of x is equal to 1 over negative square root of 3. So the next thing I want to do is rationalize this. I'm going to multiply the top and the bottom by square root of 3. So that ends up giving me tangent of x equals square root of 3 over 3. Now keep in mind it's a negative still. So square root of 3 over 3, remember tangent of 30 degrees is square root of 3 over 3. But we want to know when it's negative. So it can't be in quadrants 1 and 3. It has to be in quadrants. This is going to be in quadrants 2 or 4. So 30 degrees, tangent of 30 degrees is square root of 3 over 3. So that would be here, which would be not quite 6, that would be 5, 6. So x can be 5 pi over 6. Or it could be here, which would be not quite 12, 6, which would be 11, 6. And there you go. There's your two answers. Okay, so a couple more questions. This slide and the next is what I'm going to cover for this video. Sine squared of x. So the first thing I'm going to do is subtract sine of x from both sides. That's going to give me sine squared of x minus sine of x equals 0. So always set it equal to 0 like you would solve any quadratic. Then I'm going to factor out the sine of x, and that gives me sine of x minus 1. Then I can set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So when can sine of x equal 0? So if you remember, so sine has a height of 0 here and here. So that will be at 0 pi and at pi amount of time. So x can be 0 or pi. And then over here, we've got sine of x minus 1 equals 0. So add 1 to both sides, you get sine of x equals 1. So when is the height 1? So that would be here or here. So that would be x is pi over 2. Actually, it can't be here because then that would be negative 1. So we've got 3 different answers in this case. All right. Now, this question down here says, can we divide both by sine of x? If we divide this by sine of x, you get 1. If you divide this by sine of x, you get sine of x. When does sine of x equal 1? Now, that's the same thing as over here, but you don't get both sets of solutions. You would only get this as a solution, so you cannot do it that way. You have to do it in the manner that we did it, or you just won't get all of the answers, so keep that in mind. I'm going to do the same thing over here. Tangent, of course. Tangent cubed of x minus tangent of x equals 0. I'm going to pause. The next thing I'm going to do is take out tangent of x, factor it out. So I got tangent squared of x minus 1 equals 0. And then I can set each one equal to 0 and solve. So tangent of x equals 0 and tangent squared of x minus 1 equals 0. So this becomes tangent squared of x equals 1. Square root of both sides. This makes positive and negative 1. So we want to know when tangent of x can either be 1 or negative 1. Well, remember, all students take calculus, but it can be both positive and negative 1. So it could be here, it could be here, it could be here, it could be here. Because in the first and third quadrant, it's going to be positive, but in the second and the fourth quadrant, it's going to be negative. So it really could be any of those answers. So x can be pi over 4. It can be 3 pi over 4. It can be 5 pi over 4, or it can be 7 pi over 4. So that's fourth quadrant, third quadrant, second quadrant, first quadrant. So we've already got 4 different answers. And then we've also got when can tangent of x be equal to 0? So a height of 0 over nothing. So that can be either here or here. So we got 2 different spots. So that will be when x is either 0 or just pi. All right, so 6 different solutions. Okay, on we go to the last slide that I'm going to be doing on this video, which I'm already at 9 minutes. So this time I'm going to do basically everything just the same. So 2 times cosine of. Okay, so first subtract cosine of x subtracted from both sides. Oh, I thought I. All right, third try is a charm. Let's see if the pen works. So we have 2 cosine squared of x minus cosine of x equals 0. So factor out the cosine of x, and we've got 2 cosine of x minus 1. When can cosine of x equal 0? That's twice. That's either at pi over 2 or 3 pi over 2. So at both 90 degrees and 270 is when it's going to have an x of 0. And then over here we have 2 times cosine of x minus 1 equals 0. Add 1 to both sides, you get 2 cosine of x equals 1. Divide both sides by 2 and you get cosine of x equals 1/2. All right, so when does cosine of x equal 1/2? Sine of 30 equals 1/2, so cosine of 60 equals 1/2. So this is pi over 3, or, let me just check, or it can also be in quadrant 4, which would be not to be 5 pi over 3, so not quite 6. All right, I'm going to erase this out and start the last question. So we've got, I'm going to first distribute here. So this is 2 plus 2 times cotangent squared of x equals this. And then I'm going to subtract 2 cotangent squared of x from both sides. And that's going to leave me with just 1 cotangent squared of x. And if I subtract 2 from both sides, I get minus 3 equals 0. Actually, I should have moved it to the other side. Sorry. If I add 1 and add 1, I get 3 over here. So 3 equals cotangent squared of x. Okay, so square root of both sides, and that leaves me with cotangent of x equals square root of 3. So this is where I gotta think big here. So if I flip this to tangent of x equals 1 over square root of 3, or you know what, I would just leave it in this case. I'm just gonna think about it. So when is tangent square root of 3? Tangent is square root of 3 at 60 degrees, and which means cotangent is square root of 3 at 30 degrees. All right, so now I've got that understood. So 30 degrees. So all students take calculus. Tangent would be here or here. So 30 degrees here, 30 degrees here. So pi over 6 is an answer. And this would be 7 pi over 6. And there you go. So that's 30 degrees in the first quadrant and the third quadrant are your two answers. All right, thanks again for watching and have a wonderful day.